Hello, friends, and let's get started.
Emily cast a quick glance at the walls of the office. The entire office was decorated for the holidays. Spruce wreaths with red ribbons, golden balloons, and the obligatory miniature Christmas tree in the corner with gifts wrapped for a charity event. Her co-workers bustled about, discussing gifts, their plans, and where they would go to celebrate the new year. The atmosphere was filled with voices, laughter, and the clinking of cocoa mugs. But Emily felt separate from it all, as if someone had pressed pause on her personal life. For weeks now, she had noticed the fatigue building up inside. Not. "Emily, are you with us?" Megan's voice brought her out of her musings. Her friend stood next to her, leaning on the table, looking at her with the usual sparkle of excitement in her eyes. It was Thursday. It's almost New Year's Eve. Let's have a little pre-holiday warm-up. Megan, I'm not sure, Emily started, but her words were drowned out by a slight shake of her friend's hand. "Oh, come on. The bar on the corner is already decorated. There's garlands and festive cocktails with names like Christmas Extravaganza. Just one drink, that's all." Megan squinted slyly. "Come on, you deserve to relax a little." Emily smiled, though inwardly she struggled with doubts. She'd promised her husband Daniel that she wouldn't have any more of these late-night forays. After their last fight on the subject, she'd sworn she'd spend the holidays at home, away from noisy bars and companies dancing until the wee hours of the morning. But Megan knew how to awaken the part of Emily that longed to get out of the vicious cycle of domesticity. "Okay, but only one," Emily finally said, pretending to be stern. "And only because you're too persuasive." "That's my girl," Megan exclaimed, clapping Emily on the shoulder. "Give me a couple minutes, I'll get my jacket." Emily watched her friend disappear around the corner with a smile. Her gaze lingered on the Christmas tree. She thought of Daniel. He was probably home right now, unwrapping presents for his nephews or watching another Christmas movie. He'd always preferred the quiet, while she'd wanted something more. It never went away. That quiet but insistent desire to feel life in motion, in chaos, in that very feeling when music and laughter filled everything around them. Megan returned in her bright red coat and white scarf, all glowing like a Christmas card. "So, Emily, you ready? Come on, let's get ready for the holidays." She waved her hand toward the exit. "Let's go," Emily replied, hiding her doubts under a slight smile. The bar greeted them with warmth and the sound of Christmas music. Everything around shone. Garlands shimmered with colorful lights, and behind the bar stood a tall man in a red Santa hat, mixing cocktails with the dexterity of a professional. Emily felt the festive atmosphere envelope her. This place seemed like the perfect place to forget about everything else for a while. Megan had already taken a table by the window, ordering 2 cocktails. "Well, isn't this better than home?" she asked, handing Emily a drink with a sprig of rosemary and a slice of orange on the rim of the glass. "Here's to the new year." Emily laughed and raised her glass. "To the new year." A few hours flew by. Emily felt as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She laughed, chatted with strangers, told stories that made people around her laugh. At one point, she noticed a man in a black shirt and dark jeans looking at her behind the bar. His gaze was direct, confident, and when their eyes met, he raised his glass slightly as if to greet her. Emily felt something she'd forgotten awaken in her. She set the glass aside and stepped toward the bar, where the man immediately began a conversation. "You seem to be the brightest star of the evening," he said with a slight smile. "Well, I don't know," she replied, laughing lightly. "There are so many garlands here, it's hard for me to compete with them." Emily only shrugged, feeling the cocktail and the evening making her stronger, more confident. She was the center of attention, like a star on top of a Christmas tree. The bar was filled with Christmas magic. The garlands glowed, the music played louder than usual, and the customers seemed oblivious to the time, immersed in the anticipation of the coming year. Emily picked up a menu, but her gaze quickly slid across the room to the table where Megan sat. There was loud laughter somewhere nearby, followed by the clinking of glasses, and Emily realized how long it had been since she'd been in such a lively environment. This place was filled not only with people, but with an energy that she had been sorely lacking. "I'll be back in a minute," she told Megan, and headed back toward the bar. Emily stepped closer to the same man in a black shirt sitting at the bar and suddenly met his gaze on her again. His dark eyes lingered on her a little longer than necessary, and he tilted his head, smiling. "Happy New Year," he said, raising his glass. Emily couldn't help but smile back. "Not yet, but you're already celebrating? Why not start early?" The man held out his hand to her. "Ryan." "Emily," she replied, shaking his hand. His handshake was warm, confident. It wasn't every day someone with that kind of charm showed up at this bar. His voice was low and slightly mocking. Emily felt a slight heat on her cheeks. She was used to flirting, but this had a special touch to it. Ryan knew how to get attention without being too pushy. They exchanged a few more lines, and she didn't notice the waiter serving her a cocktail. Ryan paid for it without even asking permission. "Thank you, but I could do it myself," she said, though she didn't mind. "Consider it a gesture in honor of the holiday," he replied. They talked as if all the noise around them had disappeared. Ryan was witty, and every phrase he said made Emily smile. He unobtrusively leaned closer, and soon there was almost no space between them. His hand casually touched hers as he slid the glass closer, and she didn't move away. Megan grinned at seeing the two of them together. "Emily, all the men here have clearly lost their chance while you're busy." Emily only laughed in response, but the feeling of actually being looked at pleasantly boosted her mood. She made her way back to the table with Ryan, who was keeping up. His jokes were getting a little bolder, his gaze more intense. "So, how often do you afford evenings like this?" he asked when Megan was distracted by her phone again. "Not as often as you might think," she replied, a little playfulness in her voice. "Then I'm happy to be part of the exception." Under the table, his hand lightly touched her knee and slid timidly under her skirt. Emily glanced up at him, but didn't pull away, instead smiling with a hint of continued flirtation. Their dialogue continued, and their touches became a little more daring. The atmosphere between them was filled with hidden intent. As the clock struck midnight and the bar erupted in shouts and cheers, Emily felt Ryan lean closer, his breath touching her neck. "Happy New Year, Emily," he whispered, and she responded with a slight smile. But time was passing, and the evening was coming to an end. Emily knew she had to get home to her husband Daniel. She put on her coat and said goodbye to Ryan, not letting his gaze linger too long. "See you later?" he asked, his voice slightly teasing. "We'll see," she replied, lifting the corners of her lips slightly. It was well past midnight when she got home. The house was quiet. Only the lights of the garlands on the windows flickered, creating a warm glow. She threw her bag on the couch and headed for the kitchen, but then her gaze fell on the table. 3 items lay there: a neatly folded stack of papers, a small black velvet case with a ring, and a white envelope with her name on it. Emily stopped. Her breath caught for a moment, and the warmth of the party receded, giving way to a cold realization. Emily leaned against the countertop. Her gaze wandered over the papers in front of her. The ring in the black case reflected the soft light of the garlands lining the window, and the white envelope with her name on it beckoned, as if promising something important but unwanted. She took her time, opening the letter. Instead, she turned on the coffee machine, the sound of which broke the silence of the house. The Christmas spirit seemed somehow alien. On the table, instead of a warm dinner and presents, there were cold papers and silent reproach. Emily wrapped her hands around the mug, feeling the warmth slowly return to her frozen fingers. "This is a joke," she thought. "He's just playing." She sat down at the table, slowly tore open the envelope, and pulled out the letter. The smooth lines of Daniel's handwriting stared back at her like the gaze of a man who wasn't going to give in anymore. "Emily, I've been trying to figure out where we took a wrong turn for a long time. Try to justify your behavior, to ignore the obvious. But I can't go on like this. You said you'd change. You promised me you'd stop the late-night camping and start respecting our marriage. But your words have remained words. Tonight, while you were enjoying the festivities at the bar, I waited for you at home, believing that Christmas would be a new starting point for us. But instead, I got further confirmation that noise, flirting, and one-night stands are more important to you. I can't go on like this. I have boundaries too. I kept the ring because I believed it symbolized our promises to each other. Now it's just a reminder of how we broke them. If you care even a little bit about our marriage, if you still want to save what's left, come see me. I expect you tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the Courtyard Suites, room 217. This is your chance to talk to me honestly, without accusations, without falsity. If you don't show up, I'll know your choice is final. Still your husband, Daniel. Emily finished reading the letter, dropped it on the table, and leaned back. Her heart was beating more often than she wanted to admit. The image of Daniel flashed through her mind, quiet, judicious, with his penchant for long monologues about how things should be. She took the ring from the case, twisting it between her fingers. Her lips curved in a sarcastic smile. What's he going to do? She thought. Sit in a hotel and wait for me to show up with apologies and promises to be the perfect wife? The alcohol still echoed warmly in her blood. That cocktail, the laughter, Ryan's attention, it all gave her confidence. Daniel's just being dramatic. He wants attention, that's all. Emily tossed the ring back into the case and pushed the letter farther away. Her gaze fell to her phone. A few messages from Megan. Are you okay? Hope you made it home without adventure. Emily smiled. She quickly typed a reply. I'm fine. Let's do something tomorrow. The festive mood took over her again. She turned on the speakers in the corner of the room, and Christmas songs filled the house. She picked up her coffee mug, forgetting about the letter, the ring, and the papers. After all, it was a holiday. Who thinks about such things on Christmas Day? The next day, Emily woke up later than usual, savoring the rare opportunity to sleep in. The morning light was streaming through the window, and the room was filled with the same warmth as the night before. She'd spent a lazy morning watching movies and chatting with Megan on the phone. The letter on the kitchen table remained untouched. Time stretched lazily, and Emily enjoyed it. By 5 p.m., she was about to leave the house. This time Megan had talked her into meeting at the Christmas market. When the clock struck 6 p.m., she was sitting at a table in the market, surrounded by the smell of mulled wine and the sounds of Christmas carols. Megan was telling another story, and Emily was laughing, completely ignoring the fact that at this very moment Daniel was probably sitting in room 217 waiting for her. He'll get over it, she thought, finishing her hot chocolate. Noisy music drowned out her thoughts. Emily stood at the bar with a glass in her hand, laughing at the joke of another acquaintance who seemed to be trying to impress. The lights of the garlands twinkled all around, and the clinking of glasses and the smell of spicy mulled wine created an atmosphere that was impossible to escape. Emily couldn't remember how many nights in a row she'd let herself relax. After Daniel's letter and refusal to go to the meeting, she was relieved. His ultimatum had seemed nothing more than an attempt at manipulation to her. Now, it seemed, she could live her life the way she wanted without looking back at anyone else's expectations. You rocked the whole evening again, the man she barely knew by name said, serving her a new cocktail. Well, who else would? She replied, playfully raising her glass. It's the holidays. Laughter filled the space, and Emily felt a rush of adrenaline. She liked being the center of attention, liked feeling like she was in control. But somewhere on the edge of her mind slipped the thought of home empty, cold, where Daniel no longer waited. She was awakened in the morning by a phone call. Her head was splitting from last night's fun, and she struggled to reach for the phone. Hello? Emily muttered. Emily Trenner? The voice on the other end of the line sounded formal and insistent. Yes, it's me. This is the bank. We're calling to inform you that your joint accounts have been temporarily frozen due to the start of the divorce proceedings. Emily sat up abruptly, and her headache intensified. What? What accounts? What freeze? She felt her throat go dry. Your husband initiated the process. Based on his application, the accounts are under legal control. You should contact your attorney. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Emily stared at the phone, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. All day her thoughts had vacillated between anger and confusion. Did he really do this? Did he seriously freeze our money? She knew she had to act, but she didn't know where to start. The next day at work, she was met with unkind looks from her coworkers. Emily sensed something was wrong before she even heard the whispers behind her. Did you see that? That's her, came from around the corner. Soon she was called into the office by her boss. On the desk in front of him was a folder of printed emails and photos. Emily, "We have to discuss your reputation," he began. His voice was steady, but his eyes were uncomfortable. "We received an anonymous report with evidence of your inappropriate behavior." She frowned, trying to make sense of it. "Photographs that show your presence in clubs, accompanied by close contact with men," he coughed. "It undermines the trust of our clients and the reputation of the company." Emily wanted to object, but she didn't get the chance. "We suggest you tender your resignation. It's the best way out for both parties." She sat motionless, unable to believe that all this was really happening. With a heavy heart, Emily signed the papers, feeling something inside her crumble. Back at home, Emily found another envelope on the table. This time, it was an official notice from Daniel's attorney. It said he'd filed for divorce and attached a list of demands, including property division and financial restrictions. She clutched at the paper, her hands shaking with anger. He planned this from the beginning, she thought. Daniel had turned out to be more cunning and calculating than she'd expected. Not only had he frozen the accounts, but he gathered evidence of her behavior to use against her. Now all she had to do was wait for everything to fall apart for good. Despite everything, Emily tried to maintain the remnants of her former lifestyle. She went out on the town again, meeting Megan, trying to hide from her anxieties in the noise and music. But something had changed. The men who used to look at her with admiration now shunned her. Her friends listened to her stories, but no longer laughed, only threw perplexed glances at each other. Emily felt like she was losing control. Every step she took led to more problems. At one point, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she was afraid to be alone. That day, Emily woke up earlier than usual. The gray winter morning looked as lifeless as her own thoughts. She got out of bed, feeling a heaviness looming over her, as if foreshadowing something inevitable. Today was the day of the trial. She struggled to pull herself together, trying to pick out a stern but elegant outfit that would inspire confidence. Her lawyer, Miss Carla Wilson, had insisted over the phone, no bright colors. "This is not a party, Emily." Yet even a modest black suit with a white blouse seemed inappropriate for her. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and didn't see the confident woman who once could turn an entire evening around with just a smile. As she approached the courthouse, she was met by Carla. Her appearance was impeccable and her gaze stern. "Are we ready?" Carla asked, looking Emily over from top to bottom. "Do I have a choice?" Emily tried to joke, but her voice shook. Carla nodded, gesturing an invitation to enter. The inside of the building was cold and sterile. Emily felt her nervousness increase with each step. The court session began at exactly 10 a.m. On the opposite side of the room, Daniel sat calmly, his face remaining impenetrable. Papers were spread out in front of him, and next to him was his attorney, John Harris, a man in his 40s with a cold, professional look. Harris exuded a confidence that made Emily feel small and vulnerable. The judge opened the case by reading the formal details and gave Harris the floor. He stood up, carefully spread the papers in front of him, and began to speak. "Your Honor, I'm representing Mr. Trenter. We intend to demonstrate Mrs. Trenter's systematic conduct that undermined their marriage. The evidence we will provide includes her adultery, financial irresponsibility, and disregard for family responsibilities." Emily shuddered. Carla threw a warning glance at her. "Sit tight." Harris pulled out the first sheet and slowly began his speech. "We'll start with the photographs." He walked over to the judge, handing over the documents, and those were displayed on a screen in the hall. Emily was in the pictures, at the club with a cocktail in her hand, with Ryan whose arm was around her waist, and with Brad at the hotel door. Emily felt heat flood her face. She wanted to object, but Carla squeezed her hand under the table, whispering softly, "Not now." These photos clearly show her engaging in activities inconsistent with family values, Harris continued. "And here's correspondence with one Brad, confirming their meetings." Screenshots of the messages appeared on the screen. Emily knew they existed, but seeing them here in front of everyone was humiliating. She heard someone in the audience quietly aghast. Her throat constricted, the words stuck. Harris moved on. In addition, there was evidence of Mrs. Trenter's considerable spending in recent months. Cocktails, dinners, hotels, all at joint expense, of course. Carla attempted to object. Your Honor, this evidence is not directly relevant to the division of assets. It's an invasion of my client's privacy. The judge looked at Harris. Continue, but be brief. Of course, Your Honor. Harris turned the page. All of this illustrates not only financial irresponsibility, but the destruction of the trust that should be the foundation of a marriage. Emily felt her world crumbling. She avoided Daniel's gaze, which seemed icy. The judge asked a couple of questions, which Harris answered with cold-blooded precision. When it was Carla's turn, she stood up trying to soften the blow. Her defense was based on the fact that Emily's personal life shouldn't be a major factor in this case. But Emily could see that the judge had already drawn conclusions. After a recess, the judge announced, "A preliminary decision on the division of property will be made based on the evidence presented. Mrs. Trenter is denied access to the joint assets until the process is completed. She is also advised to settle her debts." Those words sounded like a sentence. Emily sat motionless as Carla whispered something in her ear. Her gaze was fixed on Daniel, who neatly folded his papers and stood up. He didn't even look in her direction as he left the hall. That evening, Emily sat in the empty house. All she could hear was the ticking of the wall clock. A letter from the lawyer lay on the table, reminding her of the day's events. She picked up her phone to text Megan, but stopped herself. What could she say? She opened the messages and looked at Daniel's number. She remembered his face, his voice. But instead of warmth, she felt cold. The holiday lights outside the window no longer seemed bright. Snow was slowly falling on the streets, creating the illusion of cleanliness and peace that Emily had missed. She sat at the window of her new apartment, small, almost impersonal except for the LED lights she'd put up in an attempt to recapture some of the holiday spirit. In her hands was a glass of cheap wine, and on the table in front of her was a laptop open to a blank page. New Year's Eve was approaching, but Emily didn't feel like celebrating. It had been a month since Daniel had finally walked out of her life. The divorce had been finalized quickly, like the stab of a knife. Painful, but without delay. She'd lost her home, most of her savings, and the sense of stability he'd always given her. Now she had to start from scratch, but every day seemed like a challenge. Her first attempt to get her life back on track started with a job. After a humiliating departure from her previous company, Emily had submitted resumes to several firms, hoping her professional skills would outweigh the rumors. But in a small town, reputation runs faster than the will to fix it. Every time she went to an interview, she noticed the same look in the interviewer's eyes, a mixture of curiosity and judgment. On one such day, she was greeted by a middle-aged man in an expensive suit. He looked at her resume, ran his eyes over her face, and then said without a smile, "You understand, Ms. Trenter, that your reputation is not something we can ignore. Our company requires a certain level of responsibility." Emily clasped her hands in her lap, trying to remain calm. "I have a lot of experience," she began, but she was interrupted. "Perhaps, but we can't offer you the position this time." He stood up, held out his hand to her, and Emily realized this was the end. She walked out of the office, feeling something inside collapsing. Her next attempt to get her life back on track involved her friends. She started texting Megan more often and tried to rejoin her old companies, but the dynamic had changed. Where she had once been greeted with smiles and jokes, tension now hovered. "How are you, Emily?" Megan asked one day over a cup of coffee. Her tone was soft, but there was worry in her eyes. "I'm fine," Emily lied, taking a sip. "I heard that you were trying to get a job again." "Yeah," she answered briefly. Megan was silent, trying to find the words. "You can always count on me," she said finally, but Emily sensed the pity behind it. That evening, Emily tried to go out to a bar. She'd chosen one of the newer establishments downtown, hoping for fresh faces and light flirting. But it didn't work out that way. The men she tried to make conversation with answered her coldly or didn't notice her at all. Her usual confidence was gone, leaving her awkwardness behind. When she got home, the snow had begun to cover the streets again. She threw her coat on a chair, took off her heels, and sat down on the couch. Her phone vibrated a message from Megan. "How are you? Did everything go well?" Emily didn't answer. She looked at the garlands that glowed dimly in the corner and felt empty. Emily closed her eyes. Memories flashed through her mind. Daniel, their first Christmas together, his smile as he handed her a present. She didn't notice the tears running down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away, but they poured out as if everything built up inside had finally burst out. Emily clutched the picture she'd found in one of the old boxes, the picture of her and Daniel, smiling against the Christmas tree. What have I done? She thought. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.